We're smack dab in the middle of our series called Becoming. And while on Sundays we're focused on who we're becoming, in our vGroups we're focused on how we are becoming. And I want to talk to you today about the secret to becoming. For most of us, it's not going to be what we want to hear. The secret to our becoming is silence and solitude. Most of you just got very uncomfortable because I didn't say anything for like 3 seconds. Most of us really struggle to be silent and sit by ourselves. If you're honest, you probably fall asleep to music or you have your fan going. You don't like to sit in a room all by yourself. You have to have background noise on. And part of the reason we really struggle, I think, with silence and solitude is because we're left with just ourselves and our own thoughts. And that really scares us in our day and age. We've come to a place, because we're afraid of that we've created so many distractions, right? I mean, how many of you go to sleep with your phone right next to you? Or how many of you, for the most of the day, have your phone by you? And many of you probably have your push notifications on, where anytime anyone sends you an email, posts on your Facebook wall, tags you on Instagram, you immediately hear about it and you're immediately looking at your phone. So the challenge is not only is silence and solitude uncomfortable, but now we're addicted to distraction. And here's what I want you to think about. How many of you, if you have a significant other or a spouse, or you're just spending significant time with someone that you really care about, how many of you would have as many distractions as you possibly can in front of you? When you're with someone that you care about, what you want to do is be completely focused on them, and vice versa, where you're hearing what they say, you're taking interest in what they say, you're asking questions, you're dialoguing. And the same thing is true for our relationship with God. In fact, Jesus often practiced silence in solitude. Throughout the Gospels, we see him getting away and being with the Father. One example of that is in Luke 6, verse 12. This is what Luke, the author of the gospel, says. He says, "In these days, he," that's Jesus, "went out to the mountain to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God." And then look at verse 13. "And when day came, he called his disciples." Jesus himself practiced silence and solitude. And 2,000 years ago, they had far fewer distractions than we do today. But Jesus recognized that there were moments in his life in ministry when he needed to get away, when he needed to be away from all of the crowds. Because remember, as Jesus was teaching and healing, crowds were everywhere. So there were moments he'd have to get away, and then he needed complete silence so he could communicate with the Father and be with the Father. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about a lot of different spiritual habits. But what I want you to think about is silence and solitude is different in a way. While some of the habits are really important for us to engage in order to grow in our faith and grow in our relationship with Jesus, I want you to think about silence and solitude as almost preparatory. There's things that we have to do to prepare ourselves, to put ourselves in a place to hear from the Lord. And my fear is, for so many of us, the danger is we want to hear from the Lord, but we're struggling to hear because we're distracted or we want to be distracted. And so the silence and solitude puts us in a place, it prepares us to be able to hear from Jesus and be ultimately changed by Jesus and let him do what he wants to do in our lives. In his book, Invitation to a Journey, Robert Mulholland argues that the solution to allowing the spiritual habits to be powerful is, quote, "found in the inner dynamics of how we engage in the disciplines." It's the deep inner posture of being, the being we bring to the disciplines. In her book, Invitation to Silence and Solitude, Ruth Haley Barton says this. She describes silence and solitude as concrete ways of opening to the presence of God beyond human effort and beyond the human constructs that cannot fully contain the divine. So again, silence and solitude are preparatory. They're the work that we have to do beforehand to put us in a place where we are able to hear from the Lord, where we're able to allow the Lord to do to us what needs to be done, that we would become who God wants us to become. Now, here's the reality. Many of us probably rarely, if ever, practice silence and solitude. And so for many of us, the answer is not to jump into it head first and say, we're going to do this. And what I mean by that is most of us aren't going to take an entire weekend and have a silent retreat. Or we're not going to say, hey, I'm going to spend the entire day in silence, because you're going to spend about 5 minutes in silence and then be completely overwhelmed and never do it again. So what I want you to think about and what I want to give you are some practical first steps that might help you begin to practice silence and solitude. So here's the first thing. Number one, find a comfortable place where you can sit in silence in solitude. Maybe that's a chair, maybe that's on your bed, maybe that's outside. Where is it that you can be silent and at the same time alone? Number two, again, if you've never practiced silence and solitude, consider beginning with a short amount of time. Maybe it is 5 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes. Turn your phone on as a timer and just set it. That way you don't have to keep looking at your clock, and give yourself 5 minutes or 10 minutes to simply sit in silence and solitude. As you become quiet in that 5 to 10 minute window, think about this. What are you hearing? Okay, so you're beginning to think about those things. Things like voices. If you're outside, maybe it's traffic. Maybe there's no external noise, but you're hearing internal noise, whether it's your heart beating or your pulse. Maybe you're having distracting thoughts. What is it that you're hearing? Don't try to necessarily avoid those. Acknowledge what you're hearing. So we're sitting in silence. We're acknowledging those things that we're hearing. And then I want to encourage you to, as you acknowledge the distractions, let the distractions go. Acknowledge them and let them go, and lean back into God to hear from God. After 10 minutes, and this is just kind of the beginning, after 10 minutes, go back and reflect on your experience. Maybe what did you learn about yourself? Maybe you did hear something from the Lord. Maybe you learned something about the overall experience, that if I'm going to practice silence and solitude, I can't do it in the morning because I fell back asleep, or I need to do it at night when the kids go to bed, or something like that. What did you learn from the experience? And here's the big one. Keep trying. You're not going to master silence and solitude in one time. You're going to need to do this for a considerable amount of time. So I would encourage you, think about a time period. If you're only going to be able to practice silence and solitude, let's say 3 times a week, give yourself an entire month. Practice silence and solitude for 10 minutes, 3 times a week for an entire month. And then go back and reflect. What did you learn? How can you grow in this practice? And remember, the point is not silence and solitude. The point is preparation. We're preparing our hearts, preparing our minds to be with the Lord, to hear from the Lord, maybe in Bible reading or prayer, that God would help us become who He wants us to become. So remember, silence and solitude, they're difficult, but they are the secret to becoming.